Tonight we talk about gardening, the third pillar of the Grow Model food system. And you're listening to Homestead Grown Live. Hey, welcome again. It's Friday, and you're listening to Homestead Grown Live. My name is Doug. I go by @IKnowDoug on most all social media, and if you follow me on social media, there isn't a lot to follow still. Not a lot been posted on social media, but more and more is starting to be posted on homesteadgrown.org and working on some other things to add to content as well. But homesteadgrown.org, and then of course the podcast every Friday from 9 o'clock until whenever, so 9 to 9:30. It seems like it's been what the last couple episodes have been. Welcome. Hopefully everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, hopefully you enjoyed your time with family and friends. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, then I hope you still had a good Thursday. Tonight on the episode, we're going to talk about gardening, and it's the third pillar of the not homestead grown model, but the Grow Model food system. So if you recall, the first two pillars are the plan, and the plan is really the heart of the system. And we talked about that last week, and the week before we talked about hyperlocal economies and how sourcing some of your food or ingredients from hyperlocal sources and as hyperlocal as can be is probably ideal. Of course, that was the first episode, so go back and check that out if this piques your interest. And tonight, specifically gardening, is the third, and the fourth pillar, just to call attention to it, is the Grow Model animal husbandry. And the concept behind that is not unlike animal husbandry on any small farm or homestead. It's we'll be talking about animals and how they are part of or central to the Grow Model food system. But tonight, gardening. So gardening specifically, and hopefully I don't ramble on or go too fast like I think I did last week, but I'm going to try to go slow. And if we need to cover this in several episodes, we can do that. But the method of gardening that I think is best suited to the Grow Model food system is square foot gardening. And although you don't have to do square foot gardening in order to execute the Grow Model food system, but it puts us in a much better position to succeed. And I think as a community, to be able to talk apples to apples, right, as opposed to apples to oranges. So when folks talk about what their yields are, what their production is, we can compare the method to the same method, and it's a one-to-one. But some of the other benefits to gardening with the square foot gardening system. Actually, you know what I should do? I should step back and just not assume that everyone knows what square foot gardening is. So square foot gardening is it's really an old gardening method with a more modern spin to it. There was a gentleman named Mel Bartholomew who was a public engineer, I forget where, but he in his early retirement went to a gardening class, and the instructor didn't show up. And so he, not being an experienced gardener himself, but a beginning gardener, met with the group of folks that showed up for the class, and they talked about gardening, and he took it upon himself to start to teach gardening. And one of the best ways to learn something yourself is to teach, right? So he dug in and started investigating all the different gardening techniques and how folks gardened in that day. And he realized from his engineering background that there were probably some opportunities for improvement, and especially for the backyard gardener. So some of these concepts are not new, again, but he kind of brought them all together and kind of reawakened it. But the idea is basically you're taking a small section in a raised bed, you are putting in soil or soilless soil that is most conducive to growing. So in this case, the soil mix is 1/3 vermiculite, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 compost from 5 different sources. And the idea is you mix these thirds together and you have the perfect growing medium. And you do. It's now if your particular plant requires a certain pH balance that's not normal, then you might find that you need to make some adjustments. But for most things that we would be growing, we would find that this soil is the perfect soil and is for years. And as you harvest, you replace the handful that comes up with the roots from your crop with compost that you are composting on your own homestead. And so you're perpetually adding organic material back into the soil. But one of the main things that Mel points out is the idea of putting a grid. So if you have a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed that's maybe say 6 inches tall, then putting a grid over that bed so that you mark off or designate 1 square foot for each square foot, and so that you garden within that square foot. And in the case of 4 by 4, you would have 16 square feet or 16 plots. So it's very efficient to start this type of gardening because you really only need a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed. You don't need to hack up your yard, or if you're renting somewhere, you don't need to till up a section. You simply purchase some materials. Most often it's wood. We can talk about the details of what types of wood, but you can use any number of materials in order to form the sides of the bed. And you typically need the bed to be about 6 inches tall, so 6 to 8 inches tall. And if 4 foot by 4 foot, you put in your grid. Now you have 16 square feet or 16 plots on which to garden. The other thing that makes this system very easy to get started is it's very clear as to the spacing of plants. You can space anything from 1 plant per square foot to 16 plants per square foot. And there's no guesswork. So let's say carrots, you can put 16 carrots in a square foot. And if you put all of the 16 plots into carrots, you could have 16 times 16, right? So 16 square feet. Each square foot has 16. So 16 times 16. I won't try to do the math tonight. Oh, let me tell you a quick story. This morning, my 4-year-old comes in to wake me up, and he is wanting me to get up, and he's getting more and more excited to get me up and get me moving. And whether by accident or a more than gentle nudge, he landed full force with the back of his head on the socket of my right eye, and it looks like I was in a prize fight. My eye is swollen and deep purple, so my vision kind of goes in and out as I'm looking at my notes. It's kind of funny. I got to hold perfectly still. But anyway, and today we went and purchased, obviously the day after Thanksgiving, we went and got our live Christmas tree. And I got more than a few odd looks as to my black eye. But my black eye was not from a fight, unless you consider my 4-year-old, landing the knockout blow, because boy, it sure did hurt. And I'm sure it's going to hurt for some time to come. Anyway, sorry I wanted to share that, but that's my side story. Okay, so the 16 square feet. And it's efficient to start because you don't need a whole lot. You don't need to make modifications to the soil because the soil is perfect from day one. Many people will make a mistake and they'll skimp on the soil. And if look, it's not cheap to get started. Purchasing vermiculite, peat moss, and sourcing the compost is not inexpensive. So it'll set you back a few dollars, but in the long run, so long as you start composting yourself, that soil will last you for many years to come. And if you look at it from a cost benefit analysis, you'll get a lot more back in the yield, the initial yield, than you would if you were just using garden soil or trying to repurpose some dirt you got from the side yard. Make sense? So it's worth the investment. It's worth the investment for not just the actual yield, but because you're going to get a greater yield than you would otherwise, you're probably going to feel a little more confident in continuing. Now, this is again with someone who's maybe starting off. If you're a seasoned, master gardener, then you do what you need to do to get the thing up and running. But I would still say that the square foot gardening method is a benefit, especially within the system, because as we start looking at best practices and as we look at benchmarking, we will be again comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, and that's important. It's efficient. This system is efficient in that it makes the greatest use of space. I've actually seen a slight tweak on the use of space within one of these square foot plots, so you can get a couple of more plants per plot if you make a slight modification. But we're not going to get into that right now. We'll probably discuss that when we talk about best practices and we talk about benchmarks as the community develops and we continue to grow. But picture right now a 4 foot by 4 foot plot or 4 foot by 4 foot box with a grid made of some type of wood or solid structure that marks out each square foot of that 16 square foot section, and there you get your garden. It's easy to design and run experiments for standardized plots. This is another benefit to the square foot gardening method, and it's a benefit to the community because, again, talking apples to apples and designing experiments and having people from all different areas following the exact same experiment, it's important. When we talk about spacing in a row or the length of a row, and you get into, well, when does the row start? Is it are we actually 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches spacing, or are there a couple of inches in addition to each spacing? And before you know it, your row has fewer plants in it than my row has. And the in the square foot garden, you take this little guide that has 16 holes in it, and if the plant that you're wanting to grow is one that's 16, then you have 16 holes. You drop a seed in each hole. If your plant is a 4 per foot, then you drop in 4 in the 4 section. So you follow this guide. We would all be growing at the same distance. We would all be growing within the same known variables. Another thing about square foot gardening is it's easier to protect, and protect in a number of ways. So you can protect the square foot garden from bugs, with building a cap that you can put on hinges perhaps and lift, or just pull off and remove as you need to get to it. But you can protect it from insects. You can protect it from the elements. You can shade. You can add shade more easily to a 4 foot by 4 foot box than you could maybe, say, a 16 foot long row. And you can also add season extenders. So cold frames can be added so that you can extend your season on the spring side and the fall side so that you get more time for growing. Also, you can add vertical growing to the northernmost side of the box so that you don't shade anything out, and you then get advantage of the vertical growth. So again, not that you have to do square foot gardening, but square foot gardening is what I would say is probably best for the grow model food system. Now, no matter what gardening method you use in season, and when I say in season, I'm in Ohio. So Ohio, we're not going to be growing a whole lot in the next now until March or April, even with seasonal extenders. And what we do grow will require some assistance. So some cold frames and cloths and protections and things like that. But for our normal crops, we're not going to get a whole lot from the ground in Ohio. So we want to eat as fresh as we can for a number of reasons. One, it's healthy, and the second is uh, it reduces our storage requirements and the storage space and the preservation effort. And anything we can do that we're consuming the food as close to its production, the better, right? That just makes sense. If I'm growing beans and I can harvest beans for 12 weeks and I'm eating beans fresh for 12 weeks, that's 12 less weeks that I need to can and freeze and put in jars or fill up freezer space, and the hours required to actually do that task, to can or to freeze. Um, I'm just picking them and bringing them in. I'm eating them fresh, so they're at their most nutritious, and they're also at their most efficient as in terms of storage. So, how can we extend that? Well, we can extend that through greenhouse or cold frames and other seasonal extenders in my area. Of course, if you're in an area where you can grow year round, then this doesn't matter to you. But most of the world is not. I don't think most of the world is where we can grow year round. So, we need to make adjustments. One of the adjustments we can make is add seasonal extenders to our current growing methodology. So, in the case of utilizing square foot gardening, it would be adding cold frames and trying to get a couple weeks on the north side of winter and on the south side of autumn. But we can also bring our gardening indoors. And if we have a greenhouse, then we can continue to grow in soil and with the assistance of light and perhaps some uh, heat, we can grow some things in our greenhouse. Problem with the greenhouse is they're very expensive, right? I built a 12-foot by 10-foot Harbor Freight greenhouse, and and I love it. I think it's cool, um, but it isn't going to feed my family, and it really is as a seasonal extender, so we can get started with seed starting in the spring, and that we can get some lettuce cuttings or more lettuce cuttings later in early winter. But if we want to truly grow a variety of vegetables, and without spending tens and 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, $100,000 in infrastructure, we can invest in an easy hydroponic system. So this show is not about hydroponics. My intention was really to focus more on the square foot gardening. We will do a show on hydroponics, but it's fairly straightforward, and the the concept probably makes sense to most people. And while I still prefer, um, I prefer to get produce from the ground because that's the way God made it. But the produce does do well in hydroponics. And if you think about why, it's getting the nutrients that we believe that a plant requires in order to thrive. And while I'll just be honest. I think what we're doing is we are getting a plant to produce, and they look healthy, and they produce uh, good offspring, if you will, good fruit. But I'm not so sure that the chemical interactions that are present when something grows in the soil is the same as when it is growing in water, and so I can't help but think we're missing something. So I wouldn't want to have my entire diet be from hydroponics, but I do also, in the same light, believe that it is probably better for me than to have that same produce shipped in from Peru. No offense to Peru, but to come in from 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 miles seems to me to be uh, more upsetting or more wrong than to produce from hydroponic means. And hopefully that makes sense. Um, okay. So again, we've got our four legs of the grow model food system is the plan, the hyper local economies, grow model gardening, and grow model animal husbandry. And if you think about it, these four things all fit nicely together. Without the plan, none of this works. It's kind of hit or miss, and it might take years and years of experience. And I'm sure there are gardeners and ranchers or homesteaders that started off with maybe some semblance of a plan or no plan at all, but they've ended up with a nice system, and that this concept would have little value to them because they've learned everything through experience, and that's great. That's not who this is for. This is really for folks that say, "Hey, look, I need to know where my food's coming from because I don't know about you, but uh, I don't know that I can trust that I'm going to be able to go to the grocery store a month from now to get enough food to feed my family." And the idea of, oh, well, if things fell apart, then I would just hunt for it. Well, everyone will be hunting. Not that everyone wouldn't be wanting to get into your garden either. And we're going to talk about some ways to try to secure what it is that you are growing. But especially if you are growing in a community setting, again, through hyper local economies, then you have your neighborhood and your community is invested in each other's production and success because you're kind of all sharing in the risk and you're all sharing in the reward. But I can't emphasize enough. I guess I've said this in a couple of the social media posts I have made. The it Don't wait. Start to learn. Start to grow food for yourself. And in the meantime, if you have lots of resources, by all means, stock up on dry goods. Get yourself in a position where you have enough food to get you from one cycle to the next, right? I'm not a doomsday person, but it just seems it's common sense. And it's amazing how we are almost taught to rely on a just-in-time food system that has existed for about a blip when we compare it to the amount of time that humans have been on the earth. So the idea that this just-in-time food system is going to continue to function as it has is probably foolish. It's just foolish. And while we don't need to run around like Chicken Little, we should do things to protect ourselves and our family. It's kind of the same thing and the reason we buy insurance. We spend more time probably worrying about our insurance, life insurance, health insurance, than we do um, food insurance. And I view having the skill to produce your own food is just as important as any insurance that you have. It doesn't mean producing all of your own food, but it means having the skill to do so and having a plan that you can scale that takes you there, right? So maybe you don't need 50 8x10 uh, raised beds. Maybe you need 2 to get yourself in the game, right? And once you get in the game, meaning you start growing, you start learning. But once you learn, it doesn't mean then you need to scale up, but you would know how to scale up. And that's the key. And be in a position that you could scale up when you needed to scale up. So having the infrastructure to scale. If what you do is you keep enough chickens to have omelets once every week, great. But you could scale up at any time with additional chickens should events start to look like they're going in a direction that would require it. Right? Does this make sense? Okay, so we're going to wrap up. Each Friday at 9 o'clock to 9 something, 9:30ish. It looks like now. It could go longer as we go along, but I'd like to have you join us. I invite you to like the show, to follow the show, and to share. Recognize that I am not a professional. I'm not pretending to be a professional broadcaster. I'll get better as time goes on. And in due time, I'd like to see participation, because we're going to learn from one another. And as I continue to share what the Grow Model food system is, there are going to be things that you're going to say, hey, you could do this. We should try that. And that's what this is all about. In fact, one of the primary components, again, you've heard me talk about it at the beginning of this episode, is benchmarking and best practices. I come from the corporate world. I'm a Six Sigma certified black belt. And so data, design of experiments, full and factorial design of experiments, they're all, I just love that stuff. And so we can apply that to gardening, and we don't need to make it overwhelming. But what we can do is we can make it so we can be the best and most efficient at producing food that we can be, that can be scalable, it's clean, it's healthy, and we can better ourselves, our neighborhoods, and our environment. So that's what we're here for. And we want to help each other do that and help each other grow and learn and inspire. And I'd like to see at some point where the big box grocery stores become a thing of the past. And they served a purpose. All things serve a purpose and have their season. But I don't believe that centralized food distribution is in the best interest of mankind in general. I believe it's probably in the best interest of the few that are in power, especially when they decide to use the centralized nature of our food system to ensure the adherence to whatever they're looking for. So, again, I thank you for joining me. A happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Next Friday, 9:00. Hope to see you again. Until then, have a great night. And I'm an Ohio State fan. We play Michigan tomorrow, so go Bucks.